Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We have another wonderful panel discussion to bring you today, which is the latest in a series of talks from Elemental in association with BEAMA this week. We're hosting this virtual series. Reminder, Elemental is the online community for professionals focused on heat, water, air, and energy, which looking at how we effectively manage these vital elements within the built environment. And today, our expert panelists we've brought together to discuss indoor air quality and how we can make our buildings healthier. So we're going to be looking at the causes and the impacts of indoor air quality, be looking at some of the potential technical and the political solutions, and hopefully we'll come away with a bit of a better idea about how we can make our buildings healthier in the future. So delighted to welcome today speakers from, we've got Jade Lewis, who's Chief Executive of the Sustainable Energy Association. We have Dr. Marcella Ucci, who is Associate Professor in the Environmental and Healthy Buildings at the UCL Institute for Environmental Design and Engineering at Bartlett. That's a mouthful, isn't it? I'll allow you, Marcella, to introduce yourself fully in a moment, and also Keith Ritchie, who is Chairman of BEAMA Ventilation and Executive Chairman of Titan Holdings. So thank you everyone so much for joining. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to have a discussion first, but if you're listening, I would encourage you to ask any questions that you have of the participants of the panel. There is a Q&A button on your toolbar, which you should be able to access and ask any question you like. So we'll have some time as well to answer your questions on this topic as well. So without further ado, welcome. Perhaps Marcella, could I come to you first? Would you like to just introduce yourself to everyone?
Yes, hello everyone. So I am Dr. Marcella Ucci. I'm an associate professor in environmental and healthy buildings, and as Ben said, this is at the UCL Institute for Environmental Design and Engineering, which is part of the Bartlett Faculty of the Built Environment at University College London. And you can see in the background, you can imagine that I'm sitting in the quad at UCL, which of course I'm not, because
it's a lovely day.
I would love it for me to, yes, sunny day. So I'm an architect by training, and I have an expertise in environmental design and engineering, with a particular focus on the interactions and synergies between sustainability in buildings and health, comfort, and well-being. My PhD, for example, was on indoor air quality with a focus on house dust mites. I've then broadened out in terms of healthy buildings, including, for example, active design, modeling and monitoring of buildings. More recently, I was a member of the working group of the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health, looking at the health effects of indoor air quality in children with a focus on homes and schools. And I'll pop the link for the report in the chat. So that's a brief intro about me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Marcella. So bringing very much the academic, but like the evidence-based, rigorous perspective, I think, into the debate today. That's wonderful. Jade, Liz, would you go next?
Yeah, of course, Ben. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jade Lewis, Chief Executive of the Sustainable Energy Association. The SEA is a member-based industry body who exists to help create living and working spaces fit for future generations, by ensuring that all buildings are energy efficient, net zero carbon, warm, but most importantly, healthy. And while my focus these days is on energy in buildings, I've got a real passion for delivering improved health and well-being of people via improvements to the built environment. And I spent a number of years advocating for changes to be made, both to government policy, but also to the construction and energy sectors themselves. COVID-19 has really drawn attention to our homes and buildings. We're all spending almost all our time indoors these days. Therefore, I'm really pleased that we're able to discuss this really highly relevant topic here today. So thank you for the invite.
Yeah, no problem. Brilliant. Thanks to have you. Great to have you on board here, Jane, and then Keith as well.
Ben, thank you very much. Yeah, as Ben mentioned, I'm chair of the BEAMA Ventilation Group, and it's just worth giving you a brief introduction to BEAMA, which is the UK Trade Association for manufacturers and providers of any energy infrastructure products and systems. So BEAMA represents more than 200 companies from SMEs to large multinationals, and members ensure that low carbon energy and environmental services are delivered safely to homes, offices, transport and grid networks. I'm also chairman in my day job of Titan Holdings, which is a ventilation manufacturer and supplier based in the UK, and we manufacture in the UK. We manufacture a range of ventilation products from such things as trickle vents, which are the little slider things that you see in the top of windows, to whole house systems that are installed in new build. So we are very much interested in ventilation, good indoor air quality, and the debate that's going on around us today and that we're talking about in more detail in the next half an hour or so. Brilliant. So back to you, Ben.
Thanks, Keith. Well, I'm going to throw you the first question your way, actually, which is, we start from the beginning of so unhealthy homes, and what is the evidence or the impact of unhealthy homes? Perhaps even, what do we even mean by an unhealthy home?
Yeah, good question. What is an unhealthy home? Well, I think it's fair to say it's a home where a number of factors lead to the poor health of the occupants, and that can range from all the cardiovascular diseases, allergies, poor noise causes mental health issues. It leads to a lack of educational attainment, particularly in children. A badly heated home leads to excess deaths, which of course is a terrible position to be in. So there's a really wide range of illnesses and disadvantages that accrue from bad housing, be it lack of heating, lack of ventilation, excess noise, thermal comfort. I mentioned thermal comfort, poor lighting, lack of space, inability to be able to access properly, a complete range of issues that lead to a poor health outcome for the occupants. And this has a really big impact on the NHS, which of course is a topic that is very, very dear to our hearts, particularly at the minute. And the estimated cost of poor housing to the NHS is around £2.5 billion per annum. And the estimated social and economic cost of poor housing generally in the UK is around £18 billion per year. So you can see that there is a really significant financial and economic cost to the country of poor housing, and that's been well documented by through a number of studies.
And I wonder, I don't know if I could bring in any of the other panelists to build on that from your perspectives. I guess we're all in agreement. This is the scale of the challenge and the scale of the impact is pretty devastating, as Keith has kind of laid out there.
Yeah, just step in. So yeah, I mean, I absolutely believe. I think in terms of impact of unhealthy homes, the biggest impact is from existing buildings. Keith's already mentioned the staggering figures, £2.5 billion per year. And that's the economic cost, though. I mean, the true cost is that linked to the suffering and lost lives, thousands of deaths every year by cold homes alone. And we're coming into the winter period now. That this is highly relevant and distressing for those involved. Cold homes also linked to respiratory, mental health problems, worsening arthritis and rheumatism. And that absolutely your home is essential for keeping you safe, but also healthy. And yet we don't design buildings with health and well-being in mind. So while the biggest issue is with existing homes, and that's where the biggest impact is, we're still building problems into the new build market by not actually designing homes with people in mind. And as I said, COVID is absolutely worsening the condition. We're spending almost 100% of our time indoors. So the impact now is only getting more significant. And all this evidence just shows why much more needs to be done to address health and well-being via improvements in the existing, but also new build stock as well.
And so what are then the causes really of unhealthy homes, of this poor air quality? Like why have we not been designing homes to be better for people's health and their well-being?
So if I
Marcella,
may
would
come
that,
in,
yeah,
yes. So first of all, with respect to indoor air quality, I would say that the evidence regarding the health impacts for some pollutants is well known, and for some others is not as well understood. But one of the key challenges is to understand the scale of the problem, because a lot of the studies have been done by monitoring outdoor pollutants, because it's a lot cheaper and easier. Whereas obviously monitoring pollutants indoor at scale can be complex, can be expensive, but there are advances in technologies these days that are allowing a better understanding of the scale of the problem. So that's one of the issues. In terms of what are the causes, we really need to remind ourselves that the key aspect that we need to tackle first and foremost are the sources of pollution. So not only outdoor, which can come in indoor, for example, traffic, etc., but also, for example, emissions from building products, from occupants' activities, including cooking, burning on candles, etc. And at the moment, there isn't a very strong understanding of the pattern and profile of emissions indoors. Secondly, of course, the ventilation, how well the building is ventilated. We know that sometimes ventilation isn't adequate or isn't fully commissioned or operated properly. But of course, in order to understand how much ventilation we need, we also need to know how much of the concentration of pollutants we need to dilute. And so back to my earliest point, that we need to know how much pollutants are being built up indoor. And of course, there's been a lot of resistance to have what has been looked at as excessive ventilation due to the potential of then excessive energy loss regarding ventilation. But we know that this can be done in an energy efficient way. So funnily enough, before coming to this talk, I was looking at some recent papers regarding what is the latest evidence about whether indoor air quality is better or worse or the same in energy efficient building versus non-conventional. And I can tell you that the evidence is quite contradictory. So you will find papers that say that it can be worse in energy efficient buildings, and other papers that say the exact opposite. Now, this is reassuring because it means that the devil is in the details. So it's not energy efficiency per se that can cause problems with air quality or not, but it's how it's implemented and how the ventilation is implemented and designed. And I'll stop here.
So it was an interesting point that you kind of pause on. I wonder if I could throw out a question, to like kind of who should be taking more responsibility, for this design? Is it in the architects? Is it some of the installers?
Well, I mean,
thinking about the audience that we've got here.
Yeah, Ben. I mean, again, you've got to look at new build and refurbs. The existing housing stock, and one of the problems we have is that the building regulations for ventilation were only started in 1990. So every home built before 1990 had no ventilation system provision for it at all. Now, in those, when houses were being built, the main source of ventilation was either opening the windows or just the leakiness of the buildings. So, of course, as the emphasis has been on the carbon picture and reducing the carbon usage in buildings, what we've seen is that people have insulated their homes, and there have been lots of government schemes to achieve that without considering the impact of wrapping a home up with high levels of insulation, and that has led to poor indoor air quality, as we were touching on. So it is a consequence. And coming back to your question, if we look at new build, as Jade has already mentioned, unless standards are maintained and enforced, even in new build, you can get badly ventilated homes. In replacement, in the existing housing stock, that is almost endemic, because there's no incentive whatsoever to introduce any sort of ventilation provisions. But there is a lot of incentive to make your home, more insulated.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, as I said earlier, new build aren't built with health and well-being in mind. So I think there's a responsibility for industry, for designers, for builders to start thinking that way. Instead, we tend to build to building regulations, and then it's even debatable, do we actually build to building regulations? There's a significant performance gap, for example, on the energy side, which is hugely critical for thermal comfort and then health. So failure to take a holistic approach to building design and consider the occupants means that certain parameters that are important to health are overlooked. So we need to be looking at thermal comfort, air quality, lighting, views of outdoors, acoustics, space, safety, all of that needs to be considered. And at the moment, very few people do that. But the biggest cause, like we say, is existing homes. And in the UK, we've got some of the worst stock across Europe. And they're cold, damp, drafty homes, all of which exacerbating poor health. And we're yet to see a government programme to set out fully retrofit plan across the UK to address this. Past and current schemes have focused on elements, they've focused on energy, and then we've got unintended consequences, overheating, poor air quality, moisture and mold. So it's actually made the situation worse in some instances. So again, if we're retrofitting in future and we're doing any kind of government scheme, we really need to think about a holistic approach that focuses on that occupant and then prevents those problems from occurring in future while addressing well-being of everyone at the same time.
And
may I go back to your question, Ben, because who is responsible, and I think that's one of the issues in this field. In the sense that, indoor air quality, but all sorts of other aspects to do with indoor environmental quality, temperature, noise, mold, dampness, etc. They ultimately result from a combination of the building performance itself, the occupants' behavior and activities, and of course other drivers such as weather, outdoor pollution, etc. And so in some ways, people can hide behind these lack of clarity in the chain of responsibility. To add to that, if we make a parallel with energy efficiency, at least with energy, in theory, we have one common performance indicator, kilowatt hour carbon emissions, okay? And we can more or less measure it. Whereas with health and well-being, the performance indicators are extremely varied, and you can't always compare them across. From a designer's perspective, what can be particularly difficult is that, for example, for air quality, the most important metric is the concentration of pollutants indoor. But that is a combination of how good the ventilation system is, what emissions there are from the building fabric itself, and then whatever else the occupant does in those buildings. So if the building then fails in terms of the concentration of pollutants indoor, at times it can be hard to understand whose fault is it. Is it because, is the ventilation isn't sufficient to cater for the occupants' needs and activities? Is it because installers installed, paints with high emissions, etc.?
Yeah, and moving a bit further on from that, one of the big issues that we've got is that there is a real lack of public awareness of indoor air quality. What does it mean? The being really simplistic about it, you can't see it. That's part of the problem here. It's invisible, and you only see it when it's caused a problem. Either you've got mold or damp, which manifests itself, moisture in the windows, which is then indicative of a problem, or that the occupant is already suffering from poor health, cardiovascular, allergies, asthma, particular, but by then it's too late. They've been in this building, they've suffered from the poor indoor air quality, and what we need to do is to make sure that from the start they live in a building where the air quality is better and that they don't suffer from these issues.
Sure. So the big question becomes, how do we do that? And what are some of the solutions?
If I can say, in terms of risks from a installer or manufacturer or designer, however, whilst historically it's absolutely true that the public doesn't completely understand indoor air quality, you can't see it. There is a lot of research going on around indoor air quality, and I'm sure this will result then in campaigns raising awareness about indoor air quality. in parallel, we have some relatively cheap sensors being sold on the market, specifically targeting the residential market, that you can buy on the internet for about 100, 150 pounds that can supposedly tell you the concentration of pollutants indoors. Now, that is a risk in a way of litigation. I would say from a health perspective, it would be quite hard to prove that anyone with a specific condition, it was caused by the poorer quality in that particular building, unless it was something extremely specific like aspergillosis or whatever else. Nonetheless, you can see the potential for litigation arising. And so the advent of this cheaper sensor suddenly puts greater control on the consumer, on the inhabitant of homes. And so hopefully also greater pressure on the supply chain to deliver better performance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's one interesting that's coming up. I might go to Jade now, and we're going to try and start to look to the future and look to some potential sort of solutions now. I mean, what is it? What do you think government can do? What are perhaps some of the political solutions to this challenge?
I think the first thing is focus on it. At the moment, they're not focused on health and well-being. So unless you aim to do something, you're not going to get there in the end. And if all we're focusing on is productivity and carbon, not that they're not important, they're highly important, but you need that health and well-being element in there. So for example, if you look at Wales, they've got their Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. It's there to require public bodies in Wales to think about long-term impact of their decisions, to work better with people, communities and each other, and to prevent persistent problems such as poverty, health inequalities and climate change. So in Wales, they are focused on it. In the rest of the UK, not so much. The government also needs to allocate ownership. We need a minister to take charge and implement policy to address health and well-being in homes and buildings. Now, Kit Malthouse, when he was housing minister, did say he was responsible. Yet to hear from Chris Pincher and hear whether he will take responsibility. But then that's just housing. So who's then responsible for the wider building stock and health? And government policy isn't joined up. We get MHCLG that look at the structural and safety issues, and they'll take care of that side of the building. The Department of Health don't see themselves as responsible for health in buildings, so they're not pushing for this. Environment side, they think about the exterior, they don't think about the interior. So there's a lack of ownership at government level and a lack of joined up thinking, which means that we're not going to deliver it if we just focus on the wrong things. Government's targeted to build 300,000 more homes. We know we need that, but let's make sure they're healthy homes. Let's make sure that we're improving the quality and the performance of those homes that we're building. And I think, there's lots and lots of evidence that show that poor quality housing impacts badly on health, but we're still lacking that good evidence that shows that if you design a building in the right way, that positively impacts on health. And that's where academics can help and industry can help to kind of gather that evidence and really show and drive that stronger case for making changes to the building regulations and building standards going forwards. And we need a national renovation strategy that takes a holistic approach to addressing health and well-being and not just carbon, so that the industry can gear up, everyone can get behind it, and then we can actually deliver it.
Okay, very clear. Lots of requests on the government. How about for the industry, regardless of that? Are there any other, I guess, more, I don't know, practical things? What can we do? What can people do tomorrow? What's the request of kind of industry players there? Maybe Keith, you could.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wrote, I would kind of counsel people to, very simply ventilate more and ventilate better. I know it sounds simplistic, but a lot of houses do not have adequate ventilation. So whenever energy efficient measures are being installed across the full range, and there's a wide list of them now, and a lot of them in the Green Homes Grant Scheme, then installers particular, need to consider the ventilation implications of those energy efficient measures. Certainly we've seen with the last edition of PAS 2035 that came out, there was a requirement forcing the project manager to consider ventilation if energy efficient measures were being installed, such as the insulation or double glazing or even triple glazing. And that's a positive step that that every installer can take, which is not just to whack in extra insulation or new windows or new doors or anything else, but to actually then think about the ventilation, because if they don't, it's the homeowner, the occupants, who are going to suffer in the future. So we've seen that, and PAS 2035 was introduced last year. That's really good news. I think it's getting this public awareness up of the need for good indoor air quality that will then demand of installers that they do consider ventilation and a healthy home as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And just building on from that will take care of the kind of air quality side of things. But if you want to deliver sort of, you know, healthy buildings across the piece, then actually we're getting to the point where a holistic approach is needed. And therefore industry will need to collaborate a lot more. That there is a shift in government thinking. We're moving from elemental changes like energy efficiency into multi-measure approaches. We're going to see this coming through in eco schemes going forward. So to bring those measures together and deliver those holistic approaches, collaboration is going to be absolutely key. So they can do that. And also upskilling. You know, if you want to deliver healthy homes, you need to know how to do that. There's numerous standards available already, voluntary standards like WELL, Passive House, the BRE's Home Quality Mark. They're starting to come through. So the industry could help by adopting some of these things and helping deliver healthy buildings. Another way they can help is looking at innovation. Most of the technologies exist today. They're not new. This isn't blue sky thinking. It's just bringing it together and bringing those things and those existing technologies together. Modern methods of constructions are out there, been there for many years. I don't know why they're called modern. They're not really. That they're existing technologies that are tried on a small level, but not at scale. Things like heat pumps are used all over the world. We just don't readily use them here. So the technologies are there. It's just a case of going and upskilling and learning how to use them. Fully agree, public awareness, creating consumer demand could have blocked this. We have a housing sector that the homeowner doesn't really have a lot to say in what goes on, but if they were educated to understand what building performance means, what they can have and what solutions are available to them, and then demand that, then that can have a significant step at change in the sector. And the installers and the industry can really help with that process, as can government, and gather the evidence. Meant to mention earlier, the Construction Leadership Council has created a smart construction dashboard. They've created metrics that can be used in the new build sector. All the information's on their website. If we start using the same metrics and starting to gather that evidence, then that can help to push the government and push others that don't want to change to actually do more.
If I can come in there, Jade, I mean, in terms of the evidence, this is extremely important. And when it comes to health, often because people are so different, you know, to each other, you need really big numbers to be able to statistically demonstrate that there is an effect or a difference between, you know, two types of technologies or building designs, etc. And so really using the same metrics and being able to then put together, you know, data information from different sources is absolutely paramount to also trying to further this agenda, because there is an element of slight skepticism in some areas as to how much, you know, can you really make a difference, and or this is too big a problem to tackle because it's linked to the housing shortages. And so, you know, if we can make a parallel with, again, the EPCs, for example, is there evidence that homeowners, or rather buyers, use them to help them make a choice? Well, in some markets, no, because they really don't have such a luxury to choose between homes anyway. So this is, I completely agree with the holistic approach. The holistic is not just at the building design level, but also structurally. So really think about what are the implications in relation to housing policies, both for new build and existing buildings. Also with air pollution, going back to the air quality issue. On one hand, ventilation is generally good, but of course, if air outdoor is extremely polluted, then you're also bringing in pollutants unless you are filtering the air. But of course, air filters come with their own problems. You know, they have an energy penalty, they need to be cleaned. You know, sometimes they mean that the system needs to be sized in a different way. So strategically, do you need to specify air filters going forward? Well, if we had confidence that outdoor levels of pollution are dropping, perhaps we wouldn't need to do so. And so yet again, a kind of multi-scale strategy is also needed in that respect.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, everyone. And now let me just encourage anyone listening again to put in any questions to the Q&A feature. We've already got a couple here, which I'm just going to throw to the panelists here. So the first one from Marcus, thanks for this. So this is talking about obviously people, Keith, as you sort of mentioned, some of the stats of, how many people perhaps die from, poor indoor air quality or the indoor climate. But there are also people who don't, but perhaps still suffer from less time, enjoying a healthy life. So would disability adjusted life years, Darnies, be perhaps a useful or better KPI when we're measuring this?
I would pass that one on to the academic on our panel here, rather than being able to answer that one.
Marcella?
Yes, absolutely. And indeed, death as a health outcome is the most extreme one. But unfortunately, someone is an outcome for which we have some of the harder data, because of course you can get hospital, records, etc. With disability adjusted years, it depends on the issue that you're looking at. And yes, absolutely, it's a better metric. But what also needs to shift in terms of, what evidence would be even more useful is to show that if you make a change in the built environment, you can also demonstrate that there is an improvement in health and well-being. And of course, in order to do so, you need to build at scale better buildings, because then you have the evidence to show that there was a change. And this is to do with the fact that sometimes in research, when you do observational data, sometimes you find an effect, but the effect could be due to something else. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you change that factor, you will obtain a different results. So we now have slightly more greater number of energy efficient building, for example, to be able to do some research. And of course, there can be modeling. There is a lot of modeling going on about if you do this, could you have a big, a better or worse impact, etc. And modeling is absolutely great, except it doesn't always take into account people's behavior. And so I think that's an aspect that in terms of the design, besides the holistic side of things, also needs to be absolutely paramount. So kind of a user-centered design is very important. And I think there is a tendency these days to focus on technology and take away the choice from people. But people have a wonderful ability to circumvent technology or use it in the most strange ways that the designers have never thought possible. And so it is, in fact, in my opinion, better to work with the people and their needs and make a design that is robust rather than optimized and then doesn't work for particular people.
Okay. The next question is, I think it's looking at new builds and is probably asking, should building regulators focus more on limiting the source of the pollutants rather than, I guess, looking at ventilation systems that need to then deal with it? So what's sort of the balance maybe between that, Keith?
I mean, look, of course, if we can reduce the source of the pollutants inside the property, then that's got to be a good thing. We're all in favour of that. But unfortunately, a lot of modern furniture, carpets, paints, wall coverings, household products do bring in those pollutants, and that's why you absolutely still need to have good ventilation inside every building to deal with those kind of issues. There are products on the market which have are clean. I know a number of charities will promote particular products that don't have harmful emissions. The point that was made, I think, earlier on about air sprays and candles, is a very good point actually. But if you're burning a candle in your house, yes, it gives you a nice smell, but the emissions from that candle are harmful are bad for the air quality and potentially harmful for for people with cardiovascular disease. It's very simple, isn't it? But nobody thinks that burning a candle is harmful to their health, but it can be. Yes, of course we want to reduce those things, but we still need to ventilate.
I can build on that. Obviously, in the past, when I've asked that question, the answer is yes, but the point is that the government might say, but actually DCLG is not in charge of products, etc., and that's a different government department, so we can't regulate on that. But you could foresee a system that says, if you have this type of construction materials and finishes that use, for example, labeling systems which are established and tell you that the emissions are low, you need this level of ventilation. And if you use different type of products, or you don't have a clue about the emission, then you need a more conservative approach to ventilation, i.e. greater ventilation rates, for example. In parallel with that, there should still be campaigns in terms of making people understand the use of some aspects which cannot be directly mandated. So, for example, the candle burning is a useful one, and of course you can't mandate for those in building regulations, but you could explain, if you do activities such as these, at least increase the ventilation system at the time in which you're using it. So. Again, it's a multifaceted approach.
Sure. And it comes down to a bit of awareness, but also links to the next question here from Daniel, which is just around, we have a lot of, displays and meters. And I think, Marcella, you did mention about this sort of wearable device that you can buy now and see what the sort of pollutants, you're coming into contact with perhaps are. But, we have energy meters, smoke detectors, CO2 detectors. Why do we not have indoor air quality meters or detectors, perhaps to alert occupants of the air quality in our homes? I'm not sure. Jade, do you want to comment on that one?
I don't think, again, it comes down to focus, doesn't it? If all we've been focused on is carbon and thermal efficiency over, in previous years, then these kind of things won't come through. So, if they start to focus on health, then they will start to look at things differently and then demand different remedies. I think in terms of metering, we all know that technology is advancing at a rate of knots, and it's not being adopted in construction at the rate it should. So it's not really any different to the rest of construction and the rest of innovation. We need a sector that is going to start using these things, but we need government to focus on it and drive those changes. I'm not aware of any kind of talks or detail in any detail on what DCLG.
I don't know about DCLG, but in Scotland, I understand they made compulsory the installation of CO2 loggers in bedrooms, I believe, and that was as a way of monitoring, in a way, the ventilation and indirectly, therefore, the air quality. I'm not sure, however, if there's been a systematic evaluation of the effectiveness of this intervention in terms of to what extent users understand the information being provided by these loggers and then are able to take actionable intervention. And so I think, again, we need to square the circle in terms of the technology is becoming more available and cheaper. However, it also needs to be clear to the occupants, okay, if I am told that the air quality at this moment in time is poor, what am I supposed to do about it? And that in itself is not a completely simple answer. It depends on, the building types, where you are, etc. But indeed, it's possible perhaps to use approaches such as artificial intelligence, and the Internet of Things to try and build some more tailored advice, if that makes sense. But that's not going to be mandated by builder regulation, I don't think, anytime soon. But it could work in complement.
Yeah, I mean, there are building monitoring systems that are out there. There are a number of companies which offer them, where you can monitor the air quality in every part of your building. Commercial buildings, it's obviously wider application than it is in the home. So they're out there, and as Marcella rightly points out, there are a number of devices that you can purchase. You can put on your mantelpiece, and it'll demonstrate what the VOCs are, the CO2, the humidity, They'll even do PMs now. So they are there. Comes with a health warning Marcella gave, which is, you know, you've got to be sure that they're correct and that they're measuring the right things, and that they work properly. But they are there, and I think we'll see more and more of those. One of the challenges I think will be that we need to try and link those directly to the ventilation system, so that as the monitor picks up an increase in PM or an increase in VOCs, that the ventilation then does ramp up, does pick up to clean the air, and that's something that industry we need to look at. But just to come back to the kind of a very simplistic approach, the government has even, I think, as a result of COVID, has for the first time I can recall for a long time, thought about ventilation. And you'll be aware that they even put out a video on ventilation a week or so ago, specifically in relation to COVID, saying, you know, that, you know, one of the things that everybody can do is open their windows to improve the ventilation, and that is something that, of course, we all want to see. It's not very practical in a day like today, when the weather is horrible, for people to open their windows, keep them wide open, and there may be other issues such as noise or you know, pollution, security, which will prevent that. But you know, the message is a good one. I'm not criticizing the message. The message is a good one, which is to ventilate your property.
Yeah, I mean, that particular message, of course, is in response to a public health crisis. But of course, we shouldn't forget those who are in fuel poverty, as you say, who then might have to choose between, you know, do they need to crank up the heating? Can they afford it? And do they have to decide whether they put the extra Sunday roast on the table versus, you know, the heating? You know, do they have someone with respiratory problems right underneath the window, because, you know, the room itself may be relatively small, and could that give them also a problem in that respect of, you know, catching a cold, in simple terms? So so this does go back to, you know, that's an extreme case, but we do need to build our buildings a bit better, so that we don't have to go
to make those choices.
Extreme.
Yeah, sure.
And
one of the things I'll do is I'll post in the chat box a link to the BEAMA guide, to a public guide to ventilation and helping to reduce the spread of COVID, which I think is useful and gives some practical measures that homeowners can and you know, we're all, you know, we can all do to improve the ventilation and reduce the potential impact of COVID on their.
Yes, and I take the opportunity to mention that I dropped in the chat already the link to the Inside Story report that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks. We'll take one or two more questions before we get some closing comments from our panelists. So one is actually regarding sort of outdoor air quality, and shouldn't we limit the type of ventilation system, particularly in brownfield sites, because maybe are we not filtering that air effectively? I don't know, Keith, do you want to comment on that one?
Yes. Sorry, you were saying that in brownfield sites.
Yeah, should we limit the type of ventilation system that we use, because only a few can filter out outdoor air effectively? This is from Marcus.
It depends what you can do. I mean, with any new build, if you install a whole house ventilation system, you can put a filter on the supply air to filter out, you know, all of PMs, you know, NOx, and a lot of other chemicals. So, you know, there are things that can be done even on brownfield sites that will improve the indoor air quality. No, absolutely, and there are products on the marketplace that will allow that to happen. Now, that's not the same as the indoor air scrubbers, and I know government is spending time, and there are grants available for new products come onto the market that do improve the indoor air, but there's not that many that are proven. Again, this will come down to to research and the work Marcella does that can demonstrate clearly that the indoor air has been scrubbed, has been improved.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, can you clarify? I'm thinking if this was a lecture and you were a guest lecturer, I would ask you to clarify for my students what is an air scrubber, because I think it's an interesting concept that may not be familiar to everybody.
Yeah, and I'm only using the generic phrase here, Marcella, which is a product that cleans the indoor air, whatever that means. And we certainly, there aren't many UK manufacturers of those types of products. I know there's a lot of products that come in from the Far East. What the efficacy of them is, I have no idea, but they are popular. They are popular.
And there are many product solutions out there now, as well as ventilation. There are products like plasterboard, ceiling tiles that actually absorb VOCs and hold them in the core. So there's a lot of sort of product developments that are coming on the market, but because there isn't consumer demand for dealing with air quality, and because builders aren't kind of put under pressure to do anything different, then they don't get used. So there's lots of product innovations that struggle to get to market because there isn't consumer demand or a push to actually use them, which is a real shame. But actually, this is what industry can do. They can look at what products are available to them, how they can improve indoor air quality, how they can improve health, and start to experiment with some of these things. As I said, they're not that new, they are there. It's just looking for them and focusing on health as a starting point, and then you will come across them.
Yeah, I mean, obviously in existing buildings, it would be extremely hard, if not impossible, to retrofit an entire ventilation system with integrated filtration of any type. And so in that respect, portable air purifiers and or technologies such as the one that you mentioned, Jade, might also be helpful. Their efficacy, I have to say, there's still a lot of question marks about it, but I'm sure that with time it will be, new technology will become available or more efficient, and the consumer will also understand a bit better what to buy for their needs and also how to use it, because I think that's one of the keys, not for the paints, because of course once they're there, but for the air purifiers, etc.
Okay. We'll move on to one or two more questions before we finish. From June Kim, is talking, I think, a bit to the research methods that we might be using and best ways to measure, get occupants' perspectives on built environments. So obviously, a lot of academic research, and Marcella relies on surveys. And I don't know if there's a survey tool is the most common.
Yes, I mean, hello, Jade. Jade was one of my students for the MSc Health, Wellbeing and Sustainable Buildings. If I remember the name correctly, I remember the name. I hope it's the same person. I mean. So POE is extremely important in a number of aspects. Now, obviously, when it comes to air quality, we should remember that, as Keith was saying, many pollutants, you can't tell that they're around, they don't smell, you don't see them, etc. You can ask people, however, for example, for self-reports around their behavior of ventilation, or general perception of ventilation. There are other aspects in which POE can be a valuable tool in terms of, audits of buildings. And then, obviously, let's say noise, of course, you can definitely detect noise. So perhaps POE and noise are an obvious fit.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on that? Sorry, Keith, or Jade, did I cut you off?
I mean, in other sectors where they've created real change, for automotive, for example, they've set up kind of, like almost like trip advisors for build. We need a trip advisor or something like that for buildings, is what I'm trying to say. Something that consumers can actually understand and touch and kind of feed into, but that starts to rate building performance. And once they start to rate performance in a way that they can understand and actually articulate to us, we can then link that back. But this is where the measurement is so important. There was a question earlier on metrics. We need to measure those kind of building performance metrics as well as the outcomes like improved health, so that we can connect the dots and actually understand what it is about building performance and the building design and the changes made to the heating, to the energy efficiency and everything else, and the ventilation, how that then relates to what the consumer's seeing and what the consumer's getting. So some kind of system that links to a consumer rating tool, and these are starting to be developed now. They were used in automotive to significantly change the sector. But once you get consumers demanding things that you can then link back to building performance, and you measure enough of the data at scale, like Marcella said earlier, then you can actually start to drive some real change, because you're getting the consumer demand, you're getting the research, and you can feed that into government policy as well. So that consumer piece is absolutely key, and has been used in other sectors to make massive changes.
Okay. Thanks, Marcella. Thanks, Jade. Final question, I think, before we get final thoughts on.
Shall I answer a couple of the questions that have come up in the Q&A?
Go for it, Keith? Yeah.
Ben, firstly, the comment from Marcus about trading energy efficiency for health. Absolutely no, you can't do that. We've talked a lot about the holistic approach that needs to be taken here, and it's one of the things that certainly the Healthy Homes and Buildings All-Party Parliamentary Group has banged on about consistently. We have to adopt a holistic approach here. We can't trade one thing for another thing. We need to generate the right health outcome. We have to temper the carbon enthusiasm. And as Jade, I think, alluded to, there's a lot of enthusiasm for zero carbon from the government at the minute, and it's our job to make sure that they consider the implications of that and adopt a holistic approach. So that would be my comment on that one.
I think just to add to that though, Keith, that sometimes you do need to trade off when you're designing a building holistically. And you've got lighting, you've got thermal issues, you've got acoustics, you've got all these things. You can create a thermally efficient building by blocking out the windows completely. You then have no light, which is not good for health. You can then have air quality problems, but there'll be things about air quality that you could potentially trade off that aren't detrimental. So actually, if you're looking at it holistically, there's always going to be some trade-off, but what you need to do is think about the person and put them first, and then you can make a kind of an informed assessment of what you can trade off and what you shouldn't. And absolutely shouldn't be safety, and it shouldn't be anything that's absolutely detrimental to health. But there are different sort of gradients of what impacts we'll have on health. So there does need to be a trade-off, but it needs to be a balanced, thought out process that actually thinks about the person and the impact it's going to have. So it needs to be an informed process.
Yeah.
So you're talking about trade-off. So the question was about trade-offs between energy efficiency and health, and I think we all agree that ideally we should pursue both. And indeed, if you try and put it in that perspective, you can find ways around it to do so. Your point about trading across different dimensions of health and well-being is indeed extremely important. And related to these, then, if you look at it from a public health perspective, you may find that some aspects seem to become more important than others because maybe at the population level they are more important, or simply because there is more data on some than others. Then the challenge becomes, if at public health level, the general advice is that if you have to trade off between two factors, trade for always important air quality, because that has the bigger impact on public health. Then at the building level, as a designer, you always need to think, does your occupier, is he or she likely to have any pre-existing vulnerabilities that you need to account and take extra special care for? Because obviously the public health perspective is more about the averages and the means, etc.
And I think it's really
let's move on to the final question there, if that's okay, which is just about whether, with COVID-19 in mind, do you think recirculation type ventilation systems will be banned in buildings? Keith?
The advice is that they shouldn't be recirculating the internal air. That's quite clear. The recommendation from government and from the health professionals is that it needs a ventilation system needs to bring in outside air and mix it, and that goes to the government message again about opening windows, bringing in the outside air. I think any building where there is recirculating air has got an issue with that, and there have been papers written and advice given about how you manage commercial buildings, particular early on in the COVID crisis. Unfortunately, it might mean that you have to turn off air conditioning units or the heating and cooling units which only use recirculating air, and that is a problem for building managers and owners that they'll have to deal with. They may have to replace those systems with new systems. Should they be banned? I can't answer that. That's a regulatory issue. But from a public health perspective, the recommendation is you do not do it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then finally, in the last couple of minutes, I'm just going to ask you all to try and summarize, to try and give one key message as a takeaway to the audience. So how can installers make a difference in terms of healthy buildings, in terms of improving air quality? What would be sort of a one key message perhaps to take away, to remember, or something to do differently in the future? Keith, would you like to?
My message on that is, think about the ventilation instead of just, playing on with, with your, the installation of your energy efficient measures. You've got to think about the ventilation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And helping, I suppose, and educate even, occupants and consumers about that.
Yeah, exactly. It's about public education, homeowners being aware of the issues, and the installers, trained to a high standard where they are going to do that, and where they are going to produce a good outcome for the homeowner, for the occupant.
Okay, thanks Keith. Jade, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I just say the key thing for me is that holistic approach is to think about all the things that might impact on health and well-being, and then change what you do in accordance with that. Find out more, upskill yourself, help raise awareness, and do more. I think we all have a part to play. We all owe it to people to, improve the way we design and we build buildings, and that we carry out retrofits in the future. Otherwise, we're going to build in unintended consequences and not have the desired effect, which is to actually improve health and well-being for people. So be careful of focusing too much on the carbon and the energy. And think about the bigger picture as well, while that's obviously important.
Yeah, we're going to get swept up in the net zero chat. That's okay. Thanks, Jade. And Marcella, how about you?
3 things: upskill. So really, the sector needs to, then be supported with suitable training. And the second point is testing and commissioning is extremely important. It's no good thinking that you design something that works and it then is not installed properly. And we know that from research in other sectors that this can be a problem. And then being able to convey to the residents in the building, how do you use this system in the best way that it's aimed to design to do. And of course, making sure that the residents understand the maintenance requirements for that particular system.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Keith, Jade, Marcella, for your time today, for your expertise, for your views. Hopefully everyone here listening is listening live, and it will be available later online as well on our YouTube channel, accessible sort of through the Elemental website. So if you've got any more questions or you need to listen again, do get in touch. I'm sure we'd be very happy to follow up with any more questions. So thanks for your participation today, and hopefully see you again on our talks again soon. We've got a number of exciting program kind of events all around these themes. So go to elementalexpo.com to take a look at what else is coming up in the near future. But thank you once again. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Jade. Thank you, Marcella. I hope you've enjoyed debating this topic, and see you again soon.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.